In 1991, Taito released the game Haley Wars for the Sega Game Gear in all regions. This game is actually the sequel to Taito's 1986 arcade game Haley's Comet, which is available as part of the arcade archives for the Nintendo Switch and PlayStation 4. Haley Wars was never released in the arcade. Instead, Taito developed this game specifically for the Game Gear. Taito also developed a version for the Famicom Disk System in Japan, but it was never released on the NES in North America or Europe. The Famicom and Game Gear versions differ drastically in level design, graphics, boss design, and enemy placement. Even the final bosses are significantly different in both graphic design and how the fight is played out. I would consider these entirely different games that share the same name. For this review, I'm going to focus on the Game Gear version, since that's the one released in the United States, and given the differences between this and the console version, Haley Wars on the Famicom Disk System should be covered in its own separate review. Like its arcade predecessor, Haley Wars shares the same type of gameplay, with much of the same power-ups and game mechanics. While this is a sequel to Haley's Comet, the instruction manual doesn't make any references directly to the original game. Instead, it paints a bleak and grim future for humanity. The game takes place in the mid-21st century. The Earth has been attacked by an alien invader 5 times previously, leaving billions of humans dead. As the aliens, led by the evil Lord Haley, prepare for their final assault to wipe out humanity, the survivors of the remaining countries rally together and build a single spaceship to try and fight off the alien invasion. You play as the pilot of this ship, the very last hope for humanity's future. You'll take off from the Earth and battle the enemy's aliens across the solar system, taking down giant alien motherships from within, and finally taking on Lord Haley in the final showdown. Should you fail, the Earth will be destroyed as a result. This is a vertically scrolling shoot-'em-up that takes place mostly in space in identifiable areas of our solar system, including the Moon, Jupiter, and Neptune. When you start the game, you're given a few options. You can select the difficulty of easy, normal, or hard. Easy will take the average player several playthroughs to beat, normal can be pretty tough, and hard is only for experienced shmup players. You also have the option to set your main weapon to either normal, where a button press will fire a single laser shot, or rapid fire. I much prefer using rapid fire, since constantly tapping the button tires my thumb out very quickly, and also, if you're playing on a handheld, it's really hard to keep the screen steady while you're constantly mashing the fire button. This is a shmup after all, and there's no reason to ever let up on your primary weapon. When the game starts, your ship will enter the screen, and after a brief moment, you'll be shooting down enemies. You'll notice that the ship you pilot is very similar in design to pretty much every other Taito shooter, such as the Darius series and Raystorm, Lair Section, or Galactic Attack series. Even power-ups like the laser shield look identical to the shield in the Darius games. There are 7 levels in total. In 2 of the levels, 3 and 5, you'll assault the giant mothership, then in the following levels you'll fly through the insides of the ship, destroying the remains. The game starts out pretty tame, even on the hard difficulty, but progressively gets more difficult as the levels progress. There's a significant jump in difficulty between the end of level 3 and the start of level 4. It's like the game is sending a message. You got some practice, now it's time to get serious. The final 2 levels are the hardest of the game, bordering on unfair when playing on the harder difficulties. I've managed to beat this game on normal and easy, but so far, I can't get through on hard. The game gives you 3 lives and a limited number of continues. Since the game isn't that long, this helps balance it out. You can't just coast through the game on any of the difficulty settings, you really do need to concentrate. Luckily, when you die, you'll respawn where you left off with no interruption in the game. If you lose all your lives and need to continue though, you'll start at the beginning of the stage. All the power-ups from the first game make it here, with some extras added in. Your primary laser starts out at level 1, and it can be upgraded 5 times to level 6. Dying reduces your weapon level by 1. Unlike many games of the time, such as Gradius, the low-level weapon isn't completely useless. If you die or continue, you'll always have a chance to progress. The level 1 weapon only shoots a single stream of bullets forward, whereas the upgraded weapons fire more simultaneous shots, as well as a diagonal shot as well. but the level 1 shot will kill enemies almost as fast as the upgraded shots. You just don't get anywhere near as much screen coverage at the lower levels. You also get a secondary weapon in the form of explosive pods that you pick up throughout the stages. These pods can take a single hit, which is useful if an enemy shoots you from behind. You can also launch the pod to destroy stronger enemies or significantly weaken bosses. The only downside is that the explosive pods take up a lot of space on screen, especially the third and fourth ones you collect, and it's hard to dodge bullets and avoid a pod being destroyed in the process. After all, it's one-hit deaths in this game. The really nice thing about the explosive pods is that if you die, the pods stay on screen, drifting towards the edges, so when you respawn, you'll have an opportunity to recollect them. Kind of like the multiples in games like Life Force and Salamander. There's also a bomb that will instantly destroy all enemies and bullets on screen at the time you collect this power-up. There are speed upgrades, and you'll need these much later in the game. Just like Gradius, you can actually pick up too many of these and end up with a ship that moves too fast, causing you to run into bullets by accident. I try to keep it at 2 speed ups for most of the game, and 3 for some of the later stages. Just like your primary weapon, dying will reduce your speed by 1 level. Finally, you have a laser shield that will take a few hits before disappearing. As you're playing, you'll notice next to your lives is a percentage. This is an interesting mechanic for this series. The percentage meter indicates the damage done to the Earth. When you start, the percentage is at 0%, and every enemy that you fail to destroy before they escape the screen will cause the damage percentage to increase. Each enemy can cause the meter to increase by anywhere from 1 to 3%, and comets that you let escape cause 7% damage. If the meter ever reaches 100%, it's instant game over. When you use a continue, the percentage resets to 0. This is where your score comes in. Destroying enemies increases your score, and at the end of every level, the Earth will recover 1% of damage for every 2,000 points that you earned in the stage. Also, you'll get an extra life for every 10,000 points that you earn. To give you an idea of how many points you'll collect in the game, I didn't get an extra life until very early into level 3. There are pretty large varieties of enemies in this game, all with different patterns. Some enemies are just cannon fodder, swooping across the screen. Some enemies will shoot bullets in various patterns. Some enemies, when they die, fire off what are sometimes referred to as suicide bullets. These can be especially frustrating if you're close to an enemy that you destroy and don't have enough time to dodge the barrage of bullets that fires from their destroyed wreckage. There's also an enemy ship in later levels that appears for a brief moment, then teleports to a different location. This guy can be incredibly frustrating and can appear behind you in a moment's notice and destroy you. The boss fights and a few of the mini-boss fights are the most interesting battles in the game. Each boss is a different design with unique mechanics to the fight. Some bosses, like the giant battleship of level 1, are free-moving with a particular bullet pattern that they'll fire. The levels where you assault the motherships have giant stationary targets, like level 5 where an eye pops out of random ports on the ship to fire a laser beam, while small ships swarm the screen from multiple launch bays. There's even a mini-boss fight where the boss appears to be playing Pong against itself, and you're in the crossfire. The final boss is also pretty unique and features multiple forms with different movement and bullet patterns for each form. The only downside to the final boss is that it's one of the easiest fights in the game. That's kind of disappointing, as the final stage leading up to the boss is tough as nails. It's just very anticlimactic. Graphics-wise, the game is pretty good, but as an early title for the Game Gear, it lacks a lot of detail that's seen in later shooters like the GG Alesta games. Unlike most shooters that attempt to impress you with the background graphics of the early stages, Haley Wars has a very unimpressive first 2 stages. It isn't until you proceed into the mothership in level 3 and fight the outer portion of the solar system that you see the impressive graphics. Just looking at the first level might make someone think that this is an early 80s game, closer in graphical capabilities to something like Galaga than a modern 1990s shooter. The sound is pretty good, and I found the music to be really enjoyable. It's an actual improvement over the first entry, and it hands down beats the Famicom disc music, which is really surprising since the Master System and Game Gear sound chip typically sounds worse than the NES. I did notice that by level 5, stage music started to be recycled, and I feel like that's the only real downside to it. The game could have benefited with a unique soundtrack for every single level. Sound effects are pretty beefy, especially the explosions, which is a must-have for a shmup. Your constant stream of bullets does make a sound every time it fires, which is kind of annoying, especially when using rapid fire. The controls are really smooth, and the gameplay works really well in this game. Your ship is very responsive and has virtually no delay. It was very easy to nudge the ship in any one of the 8 directions, or make large movements to dodge bullets. I really do recommend using the rapid fire option, since you'll be constantly tapping the primary weapon button for a good 40 minutes otherwise. In terms of gameplay, there was lots of enemy variety, and while some areas had tons of bullets on screen at once, it never felt overwhelming or felt like you couldn't dodge them with a bit of skill. The game is also pretty fast-paced. Besides the few seconds as the stages start and a brief respite before the bosses, there are enemies constantly entering the screen trying to take you out. Bullets fired by enemies are somewhat large, so they can be seen clearly on a 3.5-inch Game Gear screen, but there's never too many on screen at once. This is a great game to check out, either on a handheld or on a TV with a compatible clone console through emulation. The only downside to this game that I can really think of is that it doesn't really push any limitations of the genre or the Game Gear itself. It is fun, but it's quite average for a shooter. Let me know if you played this game and what you thought of it. Is this a shoot 'em up game that you'd be interested in playing? Let me know in the comments section. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then.